Recording. So hi, so excited to talk to you all today about your work at Kol Tzedek. My first question for you all is that my understanding is Kol Tzedek means a voice for justice, and y'all are a West Philly Reconstructionist synagogue committed to grounded spiritual practice and political practice. How do you all see the relationship between the spiritual life of your community and the justice work of your community?
Yeah, well, I'll jump in a little bit here. To borrow a phrase from Reverend Barber and the Poor People's Movement at Kol Tzedek.
I'm so sorry. Can we stop and start over? I think we should are you going to have introduce us? I feel like we have a real practice of doing visual introductions, and I was thinking that we should do that.
Cool. Happy to do that.
Is that okay? Mo, is that okay with you?
Totally. You gave me the chance to realize I should change my Zoom name too.
Oh yeah, I want to do that too. And then I wanted to say one more thing before we stop and start. Also, Mo, when you're not speaking, you should
go on mute.
There's a little bit of wind noise in your background.
That makes sense.
Cool.
Sorry, Rachel.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for asking for that. So we can go ahead and start over. Which I'll just say, hi, welcome. I'm Rachel Gottfried Clancy, the interim executive director at Jewish Liberation Fund. I'm excited to be with you all for this interview. Do you want to take a moment and introduce yourselves?
Thanks. Yeah. Hi, I'm Rabbi Mónica Gomery. I am one of the rabbis at Kol Tzedek Synagogue here in West Philly on Lenni Lenape land. And I'm the community's music director, and I use she, her pronouns. And as a point of visual access, I am a white Latina femme person with short brown hair. I'm wearing hoop earrings and a collared denim shirt, and I'm sitting outside under a tree.
Hi, my name is Rabbi Ari Lev Fornari, and I use he and they pronouns. And I'm also here as one of the clergy at Kol Tzedek Synagogue in West Philadelphia on unceded Lenni Lenape land. And as a point of visual access, I'm a white trans person with dark curly hair and a gray button-down shirt sitting in front of a bookshelf in my office. And it's really a delight to be together for this conversation.
Yeah, it truly is. It's so nice to be with you all and connect. So to jump in, my understanding is Kol Tzedek means a voice for justice, and that y'all are a West Philly Reconstructionist synagogue committed and to grounded spiritual practice as well as political praxis. I'm curious how you all see the relationship between the spiritual life of your community and the justice work of your community, if either of you want to share.
Thanks for this beautiful question, Rachel. I'll jump in and share that I think the spiritual life and the justice work of our community kind of braid together. To borrow a phrase from Reverend Barber and the Poor People's Movement, we sing and pray at Kol Tzedek as part of our theomusicology, which for us, I think, is grounded in a belief that liberation and justice can't happen without building a strong culture and creating a space of belonging for one another that's felt in our bodies and in our bones, and we breathe through it and we sing it, and it helps us also tend to our somatic healing while we also attend to structural issues and social justice issues that are at the heart of transforming the world. And we can't do any of that without prayer, song, and spiritual practice. We can't do it without Torah study. And also, we've been really trying to politicize our understanding of spiritual practice. We know that song and prayer aren't politically neutral, and the question of who leads song and prayer is really a question about ownership and leadership in communal Jewish spaces. So our spiritual practices also have to do with representation. They also have to do with power. And our hope is that Kol Tzedek's spiritual life can ground us and nourish and sustain our energy for movement work and activism for the long haul. and that Kol Tzedek members come to the spiritual life of the community to kind of drink deep from ancestral traditions, to rest and recover, to tend to themselves, and sort of resist burnout culture, and then be able to re-enter the world renewed, and with deeper relationships to themselves and to one another.
You know, the only thing I want to add is we've also really been ourselves students of the book Our Grandmother's Hands and of the teachings of Resma Menachem. And I think one of the things that we sort of, when we cull those teachings and sort of dive into them, singing and humming and swaying and being in the body are ways that we as humans metabolize trauma and participate in personal and collective somatic healing. And so for us, prayer and song is one of the primary ways that we heal together, and that we come together, and that we do the work of sort of making ourselves more whole so that we can bring that to movements for justice. So we really see what's happening on Shabbat and holidays at Kol Tzedek, sort of the deepest and most traditional of practices, as having a deeply somatic and possibility of transformation for us. And we've been really leaning into that, especially through the work of the Prayer Leaders Program that we're going to talk more about.
Thank you both for sharing that. Like, it's such a beautiful vision and so needed in our world. And I heard you talking a lot about how important representation is, and who is, involved in the prayer and the song and the leading. And I'm curious to just hear a little bit more about your community. Who finds themselves inside of the doors of Kol Tzedek, and what is it about the community that keeps folks there?
Rachel, it's an interesting time to ask us this, because we've just participated in a year-long process. One of the ways we've engaged with the practice of Shemitah as a community is to spend the year reflecting on who we are and clarifying a statement of purpose and a vision for the community. And so sort of who we are has been the gathering well of conversation. And one of the things that I'm excited to share is that we are not one thing. Obviously, we're not homogenous as a community, but even how we understand how we find ourselves is a heterogeneous reality. Like, people come to the community for different reasons. So some folks are at Kol Tzedek because we're a neighborhood synagogue. We're the first synagogue in West Philadelphia in a generation. There had been a very vibrant and dynamic Jewish community that left in the wake of white flight and perpetuated a lot of harm on the Black community of West Philadelphia. And it wasn't until the early 2000s that institutional Jewish life returned to West Philadelphia. So some of who we are people who live in the neighborhood. Some of who we are young people. I think there's some communities have 20s and 30s groups to try to build culture there. We have a group of KT elders. We're really striving for folks over 60 and drawing them in. Just today, we got a new member over 60, and I was like, yay, we really are striving to be a multiracial, intergenerational community. And so building those connections as a source of power and healing and belonging for everyone in the neighborhood and everyone who's drawn to it. We're a community that describes itself as spiritually rigorous, joyful refuge. So if you're looking to spend 5 hours praying Rosh Hashanah, you might come to Kol Tzedek. If you're looking for a service that is a majority in Hebrew with, a sprinkling of freeing English words, like, this might be a good place for you. We have a lot of folks who are queer and trans, which has to do with who's in the neighborhood, and also has to do with some of the founding values of the community, to be a place where people have historically felt marginalized and alienated from institutional Jewish life. So that looks like queer and trans folks and folks in interfaith and multi-faith families, multicultural families, multiracial families, Jews of color, folks with disabilities, folks across class. We're really a really economically diverse community, which is both reflective of the community and of the neighborhood itself. So we're a place where we're trying to have Jews of all stripes find a home and a place of belonging and a sense of competency and agency in relationship to their own Jewish life. And, I think what keeps you there, it depends on the moment. It used to be the oneg, right? I think it's food that keeps us maybe anywhere, right? That's what sustains us. But in the wake of COVID and the pandemic, I think we come for connection, for friendship, for healing. We come to sing for sure, to mark moments in our lives, both the grief and the joy. So part of what keeps us there is a connection both to Judaism and I think to each other.
Thank you for sharing that. So at the beginning of this month, just a couple of days ago, we celebrated Shavuot, the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and the Harvest Festival. One reason that we wanted to do this interview with you this month is because of your Sha'atz Diasporic Prayer Leaders program, which felt, thematically appropriate around Shavuot as we began learning Torah and as we think about those questions of representation and who's leading. Can you tell us a little bit about this program?
So excitedly, yes, we can. So we launched our Sha'atz training program. Sha'atz stands for Shaliach Tzibor, which means a messenger of the public, which is the language, one of the many terms used in our tradition to refer to a prayer leader. So we launched our Sha'atz training program in March, and really the goal is for Kol Tzedek to become more and more so a community with empowered and supported lay leaders of prayer who represent both the diversity of our community and also of the Jewish diaspora. So we have 17 folks learning with us in the first cohort of this program. It's a 2-year arc where folks are able to gain access to a greater understanding of liturgy, Nusach and Chazanut, so the kind of musical modalities and languages through which prayer and chanting moves across days of the week, times of the day, holidays, the whole cycle of Jewish time, songs and melodies, and leadership skills to just become more confident and comfortable with support and coaching and with chavrutas, with fellow learners, to move into leadership roles as lay leaders and public prayer leaders, both at Kol Tzedek and beyond. And it's deep work because you often, it's very hard to find training in these skills in general in the Jewish world, and you often can only find them in institutions that are kind of within the Jewish elite, like folks who had access to day school or Jewish summer camps might have learned some of these prayer leadership skills, but the majority of us didn't and hadn't. And even if we grew up in synagogues, we weren't necessarily, these leadership skills weren't necessarily put into our hands. And for some of us, the lack of access to prayer leadership and a sort of fluency and ownership of these traditions also has to do with assimilation of our families across generations, lack of, like we were saying, representation and access to BIPOC, Mizrahi, and Sephardi voices and rituals. So also the way in which Ashkenazi ritual has become sort of hegemonically dominant in American Jewish life, and a real oversimplification and reduction of even the complexity of Ashkenazi music and prayer. So we're trying to kind of crack all of that open and reach for a thriving diasporic Jewish ritual and musical life at Kol Tzedek. We see it as part of the anti-racism work of our congregation, both the way in which we're training up new leaders and expanding who leads and how they lead at Kol Tzedek, and the way in which the whole community grows in our kind of literacy and fluency of a more diasporic range of music, so that we're studying Jewish music from the United States, new and old, from Eastern Europe and Ashkenazi lands, but we're also learning Moroccan Jewish music, and we're learning Cuban Jewish music, and we're learning Persian Jewish music, and we're learning Judeo-Spanish Jewish music, We're learning to sing in Ladino and in Judeo-Arabic and in Hebrew and in Spanish and in English. And so we're just trying to grow our ritual life as a whole congregation, and really deepen and widen the bench of leaders guiding us there. So there's a lot of learning happening with these 17 folks, and we're bringing in two amazing guest teachers, Laura Elkis-Lassie and Galit Dardashti. Each one comes sort of seasonally to Kol Tzedek to lead prayer and to lead workshops for the community and for the specific prayer leaders in Moroccan and in Persian Jewish music and prayer leadership. So there's a lot going on. Anything you want to add, Rabbi Arilev?
It's amazing. I'm in awe.
Yeah, I'm like simultaneously so excited that you all have that program and so envious that the West Coast doesn't have anything like it. It sounds incredible.
Can I just respond to what you shared? We're really piloting it right now, and we're learning how to teach and learn these skills together. And so the hope is that we refine it and grow better at it. It's an experiment, and our hope is that we can create something that can be shared with other communities as a sort of prototype for other synagogues and other communities kind of geographically to build on.
And that's not entirely hypothetical. We're in active conversation with at least 2 other synagogues that are really interested in the model and who we're hoping to help support create their own version of this. Because as much as we'll create a template, it's also going to be very community specific. So we're hoping that communities can iterate on this and make this more possible in more places.
Yeah, such important work. You spoke a little bit about this in talking about cracking open who gets to lead, but I'm curious if there's more you want to say about how Kol Tzedek like embodies the commitment to liberatory political praxis in this program.
You know, the first line of our forthcoming vision statement, which is literally about to be approved by the board and congregation in a week, is that we are transmitting an inclusive and liberatory Judaism for the next generation. And these words, which were crafted by the voices of hundreds of congregants, are really, really meaningful to me. And when I think about where the program lives within this, it's in the word transmission, right? The Hebrew for that word is the Masoret. People talk about the Masoret Yehudit, which is the wisdom tradition that is transmitted, and literally the word Masoret, Masar, means to be handed over. It has this very embodied physical aspect to be transmitted from person to person, from generation to generation. And so the SHOTS program is one of the ways that we're trying to transmit an inclusive and liberatory Judaism for the next generation, and literally raising up a new generation of leaders. And one of the things we're learning is that the work of transmission, it's slow, it's deliberate, and it's deeply relational, right? It happens when you sit with one person at a time and you know, answer their questions and be with them in their longings, and sort of get to the root of where prayer comes from for them and where they might lead the community in prayer. And so, you know, even as Rabbi Mo is cultivating a group of 17 people, I've seen day after day as she sits with each one of them one-on-one. And so, you know, it's amazing to think, you know, that'll be 17 people who've had incredible amount of mentorship, and that will redefine what prayer looks like at Kol Tzedek over the course of a generation. So I'm really feeling that practice of the Masoret being something that's always been transmitted from teacher to student. And that's how Jewish teachings and Jewish wisdom have lived and survived and, you know, sort of fermented over time, was in this way.
That's so beautiful, and really is liberatory. I'm curious if you just like quickly, for those who are listening, want to share a couple highlights of the program. What have been like some of the joys?
Yeah, two joys immediately come to mind. The first is that the program is designed both to offer this kind of intensive growth and leadership development opportunity to the like 17 folks who are committed to it for the long haul over the next 2 years, but also to interact and sort of intersect with the larger community at many different points, so that leadership skill building is happening for more folks across the community, and also so that cultural transmission and this sort of work of building this vibrancy and fluency touches our whole community. And one way that we experimented with that is we ran a 3-week workshop that was open for the leaders in training in the SHOTS program, well, was required for them, and then also open to the wider community to enroll in, on how to lead Shiva Minyanim. It was called Nichum Avelim, which means comforting the mourners. We had over 30 folks in our community learning how to enter a Shiva home and support mourners and help them in the work of memory and in the work of making ritual during this intensive grieving period in their lives, and leading services and facilitating story circles for them. So even though there's some kind of heartache in learning about Jewish ritual in relation to death and dying and bereavement, it was also really joyful just to see how many people want to be trained as community prayer leaders, people supporting folks moving through this period of their lives. We came together and we studied the music of a Shiva minyan and some of the mitzvot associated with sitting Shiva and a Shiva home, and really how to support mourners specifically by being in a ritual leadership role, which is kind of a unique angle on Avelut, on sort of death and dying and bereavement Jewishly. So it was joyful to gather and do that learning and to now have more people equipped to support one another in our community in that way. And we also got to have our first community Shabbaton with Laura Elkes-Lassie, who's just an amazing educator and performer, and is specifically part of our SHOTS training program, bringing her own family lineage and musical heritage of Moroccan Chazanut. So she led a workshop for our whole community, came and led Friday night services here, and then also led a workshop for the trainees in the SHOTS program. She made a SoundCloud playlist with all of the melodies and sort of cantorial skills unique to Moroccan Jewish prayer leadership and music that she's teaching and giving over, and folks have continued listening to that. It's been just really vibrant to work with Laura. She has incredible pedagogy. She's an amazing feminist scholar of music. And for me, the biggest joy is that not even like one or two, but a whole handful of the students in the SHOTS program immediately after learning from Laura started integrating her material and bringing her melodies to services at Kol Tzedek after she left, and working with some of the kind of tricks of the trade and modalities that she taught us, and really especially the members of our community who have Sephardi heritage, who really found themselves and their voices represented in her, in what she's offering and teaching, and are able to kind of stand before the whole community and be more fully themselves, and bring their voices in a more wholehearted way to their prayer leadership. So I was really impressed and proud of those folks. I think for myself, when I learn something, it takes me a little longer to then integrate it. And the Shatses have been just going for it right away. And so it's been really energizing.
Thanks for sharing that. It sounds really energizing, like for you all at Kol Tzedek and for the larger Jewish community, which brings me to like my last big question, which is like, what are your hopes for what will be possible for your community with this program?
I'll start, and then Rabbi Arilev can add to it. We're hoping that more people lead prayer in our congregation who represent more of the fullness of who we are, that we have leaders who are disabled, who are queer and trans. We have leaders across generations, leaders who are Sephardi, Mizrahi, and Ashkenazi, leaders who are Jews of color. So just more people leading more prayer throughout our community. We're hoping that we've continued to grow and integrate diasporic Jewish music in a way that, to borrow a term from Galit Dardashti, who's another one of our guest teachers, integrating this music in a way that's artful and respectful, where we're able to really think about dynamics of kind of communication and reciprocation, and honoring the lineages of where this music comes from as we integrate it into our ritual life. We are hoping for more kinds of ritual, that these leaders in training will also bring new ritual practices to Kol Tzedek, contemplative chanting services and running Rosh Chodesh circles, and also sort of increase our capacity for meeting the demands of our current ritual life. So a good example is more people trained to lead Shiva Minyanim as we experience losses in our community, that we're more able to ritually support one another, and that it's really not just our clergy holding the ritual life of our community. And just in general, like more participation, more fluency, greater familiarity with the diversity of Jewish languages and music that we can access together, a vibrant musical culture, and a sort of transmission of that culture that is decentralized within our whole congregation.
Yeah, one of the things that's sort of grown out of this is that sort of what comes hand in hand with the prayer life is the linguistic undercurrent. And so one of the things I'm working on is sort of, we're growing this from a SHOTS program to sort of a diasporic languages and prayer program. Is we're hoping to have classes in Ladino and Yiddish next year, and growing out of that, also hoping to offer classes in different Ta'amei HaMikra, different systems of reading and singing the Torah, different trope systems from across the Jewish diaspora. And this has all been really personally meaningful for me. My father's family is Sephardic, and one of the things that I've noticed is that part of our sort of assimilation into progressive American Judaism has actually been an assimilation into Ashkenazi practice. And so for me, I can really feel us doing the work of recovering lost traditions. And I know that in conversation, that's true for a number of other Sephardi folks in the community, is that often, we're sort of forced to either choose these sort of very specific and meaningful traditions, or choose progressive Jewish community. And so we're hoping for there to be a coming together. And that's something that we've been able to talk with both Laura and Galit about, is the need for sort of feminist and progressive Sephardic Jewish prayer spaces.
May it all be so.
May it be so.
Yeah.
Can you hear Ratzon?
Thank you for sharing that insight with us. So if someone wants to find, radical Jewish community in West Philly, or just wants to follow this amazing work, how can they find you?
I'm so glad you asked. You can find us at koltzedek.org, except it's kol-tzedek.org. And if you can convince the person who owns Kol Tzedek without the hyphen to sell us that domain name, we would love that. And you can find us in West Philly. We meet at church at 48th in Baltimore. It's actually a community center that we gather at. And you can also find us on Zoom 2 Friday nights a month and during B'nai Mitzvah and holidays. So you're going to be welcome to join us. Much of our upcoming Yamim Noraim, the Days of Awe, will be hybrid. And so we invite you to join us in person and to join us online, and to be part of the community and help us all recover this sense of belonging and connection together.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you for having us, Rachel. Thank you to the Jewish Liberation Fund for all of the support.
Yeah, we're so happy to support the type of work that you all are doing, and happy you're doing that work too. All right, take care.